So we're here to talk a lot about teams and about culture and about winning, and you've been part of some great teams. The Run TMC team here with the Warriors, with the Pacers, of course, the Dream Team. When you try to distill it into sort of like what makes a great team, a winning team, what else, can you think about the attributes, the cultural attributes that come to mind?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of fundamental attributes that go into that. And, what I found out over the years, especially since I retired, I've done a bunch of talks like this at different companies, and big corporations are trying to function like small teams, right? And, the really successful, we'll stick to basketball, the really successful basketball teams, like the Warriors have been for the past decade, if you walk in their locker room, you'll feel a sense of togetherness. The buzzword is culture, chemistry, all those things, you'll feel that. And you'll walk into a losing locker room and you'll feel like you're in a big, huge corporation. And that's kind of...
In terms of people just staying in the silos?
You just feel it, just individual agendas and things like that. But the way that's developed is on a daily basis, defining roles.
Right.
Accepting those roles and ultimately starring in those roles. And then on a daily basis, each individual, his daily habits, his preparation, his routine to get ready to be accountable to his teammates.
Right.
So ultimately the trust that's built up on the way you conduct yourself on a daily basis. The communication is a huge factor. So those things that are successful with teams, I think, are very similar to what successful businesses have.
Sure.
Obviously, it's tougher when you have a big corporation, right? To get that kind of team feel. But the real successful CEOs and business leaders have a way of breaking down those barriers and having that culture, that communication, the trust, accountability. And the ability to accept roles, right? And then also having that motivation, whatever your role is that day, that you aspire to be bigger and better.
Yep.
And bring on a more prominent role. And that's kind of, if you look at the Warriors now, of course, the foundation with Steph, Clay, Draymond, and Kevon Looney and Andrew Wiggins. And what the Warriors, pretty much every offseason is trying to find the proper balance of youth, experience, to really fit around that foundation of players.
The question I have though on that, and the previous panel talked about, winning culture, sort of like, you want to be part of a winning team, which is, of course, who doesn't want to be part of a winning team? But you could have a situation where you have a team that is bad and still has a winning culture, or sort of like a team that is going places. You can be bad because you're young, you can be bad because maybe you have some injuries or whatever the case may be, but can you kind of like separate the culture from whether you're actually winning or losing?
Yeah, I think a lot, again, I'll go back to the basketball analogy. It's that part of expectation. So have you been, what level of success are you at that point in time in your organization and where you're trying to get to? The Warriors, they've had a decade of dominance,
right.
A decade of being the best team in the league. So every year that they keep this group together, their expectation is championship.
Yep.
We have teams across the league, if you think about Minnesota Timberwolves, Oklahoma City Thunder, these young developing teams, getting to the play-in tournament is a huge step for them. And I think if you talk to any coach, player, or, executive, it's much harder to go from good to great and then to stay great.
Yes.
And that's the Warriors' challenge right now, is to stay at the top. As they keep Steph, Clay, Draymond together, finding that proper talent and personalities around them.
One of the things that I always felt about Steph in particular is, and just again to make the analogy to the business world, is that he is a selfless leader. That at least from the outside in, it looks like he's a leader that is all about the team, that is all about giving others and allowing others to shine as well. And then you look at personalities like a Michael or a Kobe. who were much more dominant, who were much more about themselves and about kind of like the grit and kind of like pushing everyone to meet their level of excellence. Can you compare and contrast those leadership styles a little bit?
Yeah, and leadership is kind of talked about earlier, how you conduct yourself on a daily basis, the consistency of your daily routine, your daily effort, despite what's going on around you. So in the basketball world, if you're on a 5-game losing streak, the fact that you're still the first guy in the gym the next morning, that's a sign of leadership, that no matter what goes on around you, it's not going to influence how hard you work or how you prepare. Part of leadership, a big part of leadership to me, because you mentioned Kobe, Michael, and Steph, all different personalities, different generations. Being true to yourself is probably as important as anything.
What does that mean?
Well, your personality. And then don't try and, if you're not a vocal leader, don't be
don't try
balking around and cheerleading, right? If you're somewhat a person that leads by example, that could be enough.
I think Jokic is a great example of that. Like very different.
True to his personality. Sometimes he seems aloof, but he's prepared, and he does everything he can to make his impact winning.
100%.
I played with Michael. I saw Michael's leadership style. Michael's leadership style was as much a byproduct of who he was as a competitor and the generation that we grew up in. You know, some of those things are not acceptable now. But Kobe, very similar to Michael. Kobe took on Michael's kind of persona of I'm going to lift everybody up by how hard I work. If you can't live to my standard, you can't be in this organization. And I think Steph has some of that. But Steph Curry, and you mentioned he's a very humble superstar. More like a Tim Duncan type of superstar. But also, you know, we talked about when you put it together a championship organization, the number one thing is talent, right? You have to have the talent and the complement of talents, and then those other factors can come in and take it to a whole nother level. So I do think Steph, with this decade of championship play, has really set the tone, not only for the daily work habits of his teammates, but also being very humble and welcoming so many different type of teammates. You think about the 4 championships that they've won.
That's right.
The bench players, the role players have really revolved around that core. And it's because of Steph's, his personality, but don't get it twisted, his ability to dominate with the basketball as a dribbling phenom and being, you know, somewhat individual excellence. But then what makes him so special, probably maybe the best of all time, is the ability to play without the basketball. Where, you know, he draws so much attention, whether he's screening or cutting, and his perpetual motion creates opportunities for his teammates. So the combination of all those things is why he's going to go down as one of the greatest players of all time. But first and foremost is talent. And then, you know, I think Steph is very comfortable in his own skin. He seems to, you know, live his life with an ease. Doesn't really feel the pressure that a lot of players and people do. But I do think it's because of his incredible open-mindedness. He's got tremendous vision, you know, not just on the court, off the court. He's really, really special guy. You know, as a special player he is, he's that special as a person.
Who are some of when you were growing up and playing, who are some of the players that either influenced your game or later on became your mentors and inspired you to become the great player that you were?
Yeah, so you mentioned I was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. You got that right. I went to high school in Manhattan and Brooklyn. I went to college in Queens. And when I was a kid, believe it or not, you guys are going to find this hard to believe, the Knicks and the Jets were really good. It just so happens the last time they won a championship was when I was a kid. So those New York fans are still waiting for Joe Namath to show up. The next Joe Namath.
He's injured, this year.
And one of my favorite players of all time was Walt Frazier. He was the point guard for the New York Knicks, and they won in 70 and 73. And we didn't have as much, obviously the TV was a lot different. Basketball wasn't on as much as it is now. It seemed like the only teams we saw were the Knicks, the Celtics, and the Lakers. And those were 3 teams that I watched growing up. But the Knicks were a great team. They had a great brand of basketball. So Walt Frazier was my first basketball player that I really looked up to try to emulate.
Yep.
And then with the Celtics, they won 11 championships in 13 years with Bill Russell and those great, great teams. But there was a player, John Havlicek,
Yeah, of course.
who was a great, great player.
Yeah.
My grade school, high school coach was a huge Celtic fan. And he was always telling me to watch John Havlicek, which I wound up doing. Became a huge fan of his. That's why I wore number 17 to honor him. So players like that, much like the kids now try to emulate Steph or Clay, that's why they have such an impact.
Which is actually, if my son used to play AAU and I would see kids launching the ball from 30 feet, I mean, it's like that influence on the game is questionable a little bit, because if you don't have the ability to shoot like a Steph, then or sort of like a Lillard, then probably stick to fundamentals first. No.
When you select
Use the
when you select who to emulate, you need a little guidance.
Yes.
Because John Havlicek was a well-conditioned athlete, a great shooter, high IQ player, good defensive player. But who I really wanted to be was Dr. J.
Of course. Yeah.
But I have never been able to take off the free throw line and dunk. So there has to be a dose of reality in who you select to emulate.
100%. Let's go off script a little bit and talk about the game today. The U.S. lost. Obviously, we didn't even make the gold. I wasn't surprised. I grew up overseas and I was watching a lot of EuroLeague, so I'm not surprised to see a Luka, a Giannis, a Jokic now dominating the game. There was an era, even back in your playing day, where the big guy, sort of like the center, whether it was a Kareem or a Shaq or even Mahorn, players like that would dominate. There was no one like them. And now it seems like the best bigs are European. The Europeans are much more fundamentally sound. And to a point where even the U.S., if the U.S. sends their best next year, it's not guaranteed to win a gold. Are you concerned about the U.S. dominance in the game?
No, I actually think it's a good thing. I think it was actually by design.
Yeah.
You mentioned the 1992 Dream Team.
Right.
That came about. FIBA and the NBA got together to globalize the game, to really, first and foremost, increase participation. That their goal was to try to become as popular. I think there's number 2 now behind soccer.
Sure.
You think about all the countries that are playing basketball, showing NBA games, and all the leagues and AU. You mentioned AU and the international tournaments. So you mentioned I played in 1984.
Yep.
And the Olympic Games were in LA. We were all college students at that time.
Right.
And at that point in time, we were playing the European professionals.
Yep.
We played Spain in the finals. Their teams, their players were from Real Madrid, Barcelona, which was fine, but there was a huge difference between an 18, 19-year-old college student and a 26-year-old pro. But over time, for the betterment of the game, FIBA decided let's have the NBA players involved. The first year was '92. From that point on, and I remember that summer, David Stern, rest in peace. Right. He was our commissioner, and several times he sat with us and said, "This is going to have a huge impact on the NBA game." If you look at now, the third of the league is foreign-born players, and a lot of those players, I remember hearing Pau Gasol, Nowitzki, that group of guys, Ginobili, saying the first time that they really saw NBA basketball up close and personal was the '92 Olympics when we went over to Barcelona. It's not much different than me as a kid being able to see Walt Frazier. Yeah. Right? Your dream doesn't seem as far away.
And that exposure is gone.
And we just got a little closer to these kids, and now you mentioned, I'm not surprised either. Some of those international players are some of our best players in this league. Probably the top 5 players of MVP could be international players. But that's been a process that has been in place really since the 70s with our college coaches going over and giving clinics. But nothing bigger than when the NBA really reached out globally and doing clinics, and now they have Basketball Without Borders. And those are the kids that wind up coming to our league. And it's really, really helped the sport immensely worldwide.
I'll do one more question because I know there's like probably tons of questions people want to ask here, but let's have fun with it, might as well. So your starting five of all time, who's your point guard?
Oh, man. You know, this is not ducking the question. I actually,
I can tell you what I think, but you know,
okay.
you tell me. You tell me.
Let me tell me what you think.
I'm a Lakers fan.
Okay. My condolences.
It is what it is, but Magic is the greatest.
Okay.
But if I had to take someone to win tomorrow a game, it would probably be Steph as the best.
Well, tomorrow, of course, because Magic's 6-2 now.
The proverbial tomorrow.
That's someone asked Larry Bird recently who would win, the Dream Team or. He goes, well, they probably. We probably beat by 10 because we're all old now.
Well, yeah, that was the Pelé.
No, that question, and look, this day and age, podcasts and everything is the greatest of all time.
Of course.
Basketball, much like any sport, like baseball, it's really hard to compare generations.
Right.
You bring up Magic. You know, you could talk about Kareem, all these great, Larry Bird. We all grew up. It was a different sport. There was no shot clock and no three-point line.
Right.
So,
but defense
and not
was
that's
defense.
you know, it came in '79 a three-point line. And we should have been shooting more, but we weren't for whatever reason. Who cares? But so really, I look at generations, and there are players like Steph who crosses over generations. You know, LeBron. Each generation has those 2 or 3 or 4 guys that just stand out, and then you wind up leaving out so many great players.
Of course.
I tend to, enjoy and be grateful for the past.
Yep.
And then really enjoy
That's
what's going on now.
That's a great answer. Thank you. Let's open things up. See what people have in mind. Why don't we start over there?
Thanks so much for coming in. Nice jacket, by the way. You have good taste. There are a lot of leaders here, and every leader here at one point in time had to be an individual contributor and then work their way up to leadership and make adjustments. You know, you were a great individual contributor as a player, and then you moved up to become a coach and executive. What adjustments did you have to make? And out of those adjustments, what came naturally and easy to you? And what was kind of more difficult that you really kind of had to fight through?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say in general, playing to me was not only the most fun, the most natural for me, because like you said, there's a part where you have to focus on your individual assignment, right, and incorporate into the team concept. Not too much there, right? And when you go out and perform, win or lose, you feel like you just left it out there, right? And then you get home and rest and just get ready for the next game. I always found when I was GM and coach, I could never turn off that because you didn't have the exertion or the control of what happened, and that's somewhat an anxious feeling. But the adjustments for me really were when I was coaching, and I played for Larry Bird later in my career. I played for Don Nelson, Chuck Daly, played for a lot of great Hall of Fame coaches, taking a lot of different aspects of those coaching techniques. But the one thing that stuck out to me, what Larry Bird told us, and we had a veteran team with the Pacers, and Larry, it was his first time coaching. He only coached 3 years, very successful for 3 years. But one of his basic things was, I'm not going to ask you to do anything that I hadn't done as a player to make me successful, right? So passing on the experience and knowledge from other people, and also staying away from the mistakes that you made. So basically learning from your experiences. As a GM, the days I really disliked were around this time, towards the end of training camp, waving guys, cutting guys, you know what I mean? Because these guys, this is their dream, right? And you got to tell people that it's not going to happen here, right? That was a tough thing for me, and I didn't think it would be. Much like when you're an assistant coach, you talk about taking on different roles. You move one seat over, it's a whole different ball game. Because this guy here is making suggestions, and this guy here is making the decisions. And after the game, this guy is having a beer, and this guy here is at the media saying, "What the hell's wrong with you?"
Yeah.
But you get used to it. I do think there's a lot of things that you can take from a player and incorporate it, whether it be coaching, front office, but not everything. And the one thing that I learned too is the business itself it changes so drastically, right before your eyes almost. So techniques that may have worked even a year ago, you have to update that stuff. You have to stay current. We talked about the league being the third foreign born. It's also much younger. And that's not changing. These kids are so incredibly athletic and physically ready to enter the NBA, but that doesn't mean they're mature when they join like a championship team. They may look ready and they may look like pros, but they still need guidance and maturation. So I think adapting your coaching style and leadership style is important as well.
Chris, I've always loved your game. I have a little lighter question. What's your craziest Don Nelson story?
You know what? There's not a week that doesn't go by that something comes up about Nelly. Don Nelson had that rare ability, like great players, like a Steph Curry in the coaching ranks, to be able to walk on the floor and just have a feel for what needed to happen. Now, he worked really hard. He studied, he scouted, all those different things. But he had an innate feel for the game, way beyond his years, like 30 years before his time. So what we're seeing now in the NBA, we attempted to do in the late 80s. And it worked, it was exciting. But you mentioned, whether it be Kareem, Patrick Ewing, David Robinson, Akeem Olajuwon, playing small ball didn't really work too well against them.
And he also saw the talent in Nowitzki when no one saw it.
Even before that,
Yeah.
Sharunas Marshalonis. So he was way ahead of his time, but, and it's not one thing. To me, the greatest quality he had the ability to really get a lot of work done, and you felt like you were just having fun. Because Nelly played on those great Celtic teams. A lot of people don't know he was a great player. But they kind of, the NBA was different back then. They were working in the offseason. They were blue-collar guys. So he had that kind of country, easygoing way about him, that was just a game, but was really intense. And that's a hard balance. But he had that. And I tell people, he could fly in from Hawaii tonight and walk downstairs and be totally comfortable and start directing stuff and figure out matchups like that. He just had that in him. It was amazing.
Let's take one last question. Good.
Thanks, Chris, for the interview. One question: I do admire Tiger Woods in the game of golf. I'm German as well, so I admire Dirk Nowitzki, of course, being representative for our country. They often talk about the importance of basically aligning objectives, winning the Masters tournament or winning the championship in the NBA, as Dirk did, and then kind of referring that back to the actual execution, like objectives, and then kind of aligning what do we need to do every single game. What are certain stories or things that you can share of like setting a certain goal, but then also kind of executing on that has actually helped to deliver a performing team over a life cycle of an entire season?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really, whether it be a big corporation, an individual team, and that gets down to the individual athlete / worker, right? I have this great goal. I had the first one I really had as a college player, because back then you were only eligible to play in the Olympics if you were an amateur. So 1984 was coming up. I was going to be a junior in college. I was going to be the only time I was able to represent our country in the Olympics. So I had that date in my mind when I was a freshman. I said, if I could ever get a chance to play in the Olympics, that would be amazing. So in season was one thing. I did what I had to do for the team, but I spent 2 summers thinking about the tryout for those Olympics, right? So that was a long-term goal. In 1981, I entered school. That was 84, 81, 82, 83. So 2 years out, but what was I going to do on a daily basis? I was just telling someone the other day, this was before, obviously, cell phones, and, I'm not going to sugarcoat. I wasn't, the greatest student in the world, so I would be sitting in my, back then we had this is quantitative analysis course. It was basically a accounting course, which was really boring to me. I would sit in that class with my notebook. It was in the morning, and I was writing out what I thought I had to do for that day. Like, as soon as this class is over, I'm going to the gym. And the class was over because I wasn't listening anyway. But literally writing in a spiral notebook the rest of my week, what I needed to get done. It was for that season, but in the back of my head, I wanted to try and make that Olympic team. So having the long-term goal, and we took up earlier, but having the discipline and the work ethic and the focus to break it down to a daily, what are you going to do today? And not let, a quantitative analysis class or the weather or, you're not feeling well deter from what you're supposed to do that day. There's a big topic of discussion now, and I was listening to Adam Silver today, and that doesn't mean, hurting yourself. But if you're injured, you don't play. But there's certain days when you might not feel like it, and that's the days when you really have to do it for yourself, of course, but that's leadership also. There's a lot of people, like I mentioned earlier, you get on a 6-game losing streak. The gym's not the most happiest place. But when you have a passion, you better believe that 10th guy in the team better pick his game up too. So there is, to me, coordination of, physically what you do and then mental toughness. They kind of go together. And to me, that really shows itself through adverse times. When things aren't going so well. After a game, everyone's high-fiving, and it's all good. That's when the coach has no worries, or a GM. It's when you hit that 5-game losing streak and you're on the road and people are starting to question everything. Who's that player that, steadies the ship or is the consistent? He's again, like I said earlier, he's the first guy in the gym the next day when everyone's kind of dragging to get to the gym.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks again.
My pleasure. Thank you.
For spending time with us.